Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Ryan. I'm going to be introducing the session today. So welcome to Going High Tech with Equipment. We have a panel of three farmers, three very interesting, innovative farmers who have experience with using technology with equipment. So it's a pleasure to be here. The first farmer that I'll introduce is Matthew Fitzgerald, who's a farmer from Minnesota. I've heard a lot about Matthew and the cool things that he's doing from Dr. Silva, so it's a real pleasure to have him here. The two other farmers are from New York. The first one I'll introduce is Luke Gianforte. He's a managing partner at Gianforte Farm and does certified organic grain crop production. It's a real pleasure to have Luke out here. The last farmer is Dan Gladstone. So Dan works at Ochsner Farm, and Dan was, I think, the farmer I can say who introduced me to camera-guided cultivation. So it's a real pleasure to introduce the three farmers today. And so they're all going to do some presentations up here, quick presentations, and then we'll have some discussion. So as we're going along, please think of some questions to ask the panelists here, and look forward to a good discussion today. So thanks, everyone. Yep. Dan?
All right. If anything catches your interest while we're going through these, I think the idea is we're just going to give a quick overview of what we're doing and then hopefully have some discussion later. So I'm Dan Gladstone. I come from a conventional dairy background. As soon as I had a learner's permit, I was taking care of maternity pen at about a 2,000 cow dairy. Went to college, got kicked out of college. Went to community college and fed cows at a 170 cow dairy while I was at community college, also conventional. Started to think about, just the different pressures that a farm that size was facing and what their options might be if they want to get into a different market. And I sort of got interested in organic, ended up transferring to Cornell and getting involved with a student farm, which was just a vegetable farm, and sort of made some connections and ended up working part-time for Tor Ochsner. My senior year there, I've been there for 13 years now, so I really got stuck in Ithaca. We wanted to start off by asking the audience kind of where you're at so we have an idea who the audience is, what your spectrum of integration is. So who here is using GPS without auto steer? See, you all jumped the gun. Is anyone using a light bar GPS? Maybe we got half of one in the back. So there's a lot of hands up, GPS with auto steer. Okay. This was my impression, is that New York was a few years behind all you guys out here because you have so many acres to cover. I would say it's almost 75–80% in New York, but it's a little bit unclear. Who's collecting yield data? Wow, almost as many as auto steer. Okay. Camera guidance for weed management. All right, finally we're getting some differentiation. And okay, this one's a little different. What Luke's going to talk about a little bit with his bins made me think of it. Who has Wi-Fi coverage in their shop or storage facility? Okay. So usually when we're thinking about technology, we're looking at the shiny new stuff, auto steer. It's important to take a look back at some of the smaller stuff, what we have in our pocket, how we use that day to day, and I think there's a lot of stuff to learn, especially from the younger generation, which I can actually see a younger generation than me starting to come in. Things as simple as, we used to do a couple phone calls in the morning. Why don't we do a conference call instead? Text messages. My boss actually just got a smartphone last year. So text messages on our farm are actually a revelation. And I think a lot of people take it for granted, but having that very concrete, short exchange of information that doesn't take a phone call out of your time makes a big thing. Being able to share pictures digitally, trying to explain if something is 10% broken or 20% broken and how many more acres are you going to get through. Sometimes you just got to have somebody send you a picture of it and you can really bring your judgment into the field when you can't be out in the field. Our entry into precision has been pretty incremental. We started with a TJet Centerline 220 light bar that we bought off of a conventional neighbor who couldn't stand to use it on his sprayer anymore. He went to auto steer. We were using it for distance measuring when we're still moldboard plowing, so laying out lands to make them parallel. That was one of the things that I really loved about it. Setting up contour strips. We do all straight contour strips, so we could do it with a light bar. If nothing else, you could drive down the other field and mark it. You couldn't really start your furrow with it. But We got an ag leader compass light bar so we could spread frost seed clover in the dark, start doing a better job putting chicken manure where we thought it should be instead of just, looking to see if you're about 30 feet away from your last wheel tracks. I'm assuming this is how all you guys sort of started thinking about it. Now we've got we got auto steer set up for the compass, and then we've added 2 ag leader in commands and on track 3s. Our fleet of equipment is pretty old. We really like to stay pre-emissions on our tractors, so the majority, none of it is was precision ready when we got it. So a big part for us, we also like to have duplicitous tractors, so we have a lot of backups. So we've got 9 cab tractors that we consider our row crop tractors, and we wanted to be able to not have to put auto steer in every one, so we focused on something we could move between tractors. It takes about 10 or 15 minutes to switch 4 components, the ECU, the antenna, and a steering ring on the steering wheel, as well as the display. The ECU needs to be hard mounted. That's what takes up the time. You need a nut driver. It's not a big deal, but it saves us about $3,000 in each tractor that we would otherwise have to put it in. Each tractor has $500 or $600 of cables in it. We've also added, since then, we did get a 9570 combine that was Green Star ready, didn't have a display. We bought a used 2600 display, which I cannot wait until it finally bricks itself. We have a lot of issues with that display, but it gets us auto swath and lock, and it does take a lot of stress out of small grains harvests. We collect yield data with it, but that's kind of the next step for us. We're not where we want to be with that at all. And we've added another tractor with a CFX 750 and Easy Pilot. We really appreciate that that's always in that tractor and always set up to go. So that's kind of maybe our inspiration to get a couple more units, so we're doing less switching. We have a pretty nice Vanguard 5500 population monitor, high rate sensors, so we can actually detect some changes in small grain planting rates. There's quite a bit of fudge factor in those, but it does give us the ability to evaluate a stand from one year to the next, and you can trust it when it says it's 200,000 or 300,000 plants per acre, more or less. It allows you to zero in a little quicker, or if you move to a different size grain that you're not familiar with, a new variety or something. All the reasons we thought it would pay for itself: fuel use, overlap, save seed on point rows, save seed not planting into the headlands, extra compaction from chasing, when you're not auto steering, when you chase that coverage for the last corner pie shape, you're running over quite a bit of the field. I would say all of those, other than the extra compaction due to overlap and efficiency of moving through the field, those are almost the least important parts of why we like it and why we preach about it to anyone who doesn't have it. How it's actually paying for itself, I would say the number one thing is that tasks are being observed a lot more carefully, a lot more closely, which is kind of a two-parter. You have better crop outcomes because agronomically you're doing a better job. You're staying on top of settings. Settings are being changed, and you kind of get a quicker look at them right out of the gate versus, I'm coming up to a turn. I can't look at it for the next 200 feet. So you lose a couple minutes of observation every time you're coming up to a turn and leaving a turn. And the second part of watching more closely is equipment breakdowns. Breakdowns get caught a lot more fast. You see a spring coming off of the field cultivator, something like that, you're much more likely to catch it in the first 10 minutes than otherwise. I think there's a big thing to be said for the wear and tear just of trying to drive in a straight line. That constant weaving turn when you're trying to go straight, or you're pretty much going straight, you're always kind of moving back 6-10 inches as you're going across the field. I think on planting equipment in particular, since we started auto steering, we have a John Deere 455 drill. It's been about 4 years. I haven't put a part on that drill, and you can see, well, you can't see there, but we've got some pretty rocky soil, so it's kind of amazing. And I really am starting to attribute that to the fact that it's just getting pulled straight through the field. You don't have that wear on the bushings every time you make that 6-inch turn, especially on articulated tractors, because when you turn an articulated tractor, it's not like it's not so smooth in the back. That hitch just goes sideways 2 or 3 inches when you grab the steering wheel. Another thing we really like about it is that you can use it to really reduce the task load when you're training people. You don't take into account how much people have on their plate when they might be in a completely new tractor. They've got this thing behind them that they've never seen, and just taking one thing out of the equation can really make a big difference. And even for ourselves, if we're setting up a new tool, being able to observe it right out of the gate. Operator fatigue, this is like the big selling point for me. The ergonomics of the tractor, being able to position your body, how many guys, the number one reason they hate the moldboard plow is because they were doing this for about 30 years and their back is completely screwed. So being able to, it's not like you're going to be in a lazy boy up there, but taking your hand off the steering wheel, positioning your body with a little bit of an angle, not having that constant tension in your arm and your back even, it makes a pretty big difference at the end of the day. And I don't know quite how to account for it, but that's almost something you can't put in dollars and cents. The cumulative brain effort to steer all day, especially the old timers, they're that's how you judge a farmer, is how straight his rows are, how good his guess rows are. And just because you can do it doesn't mean it's not taking a part of your brain all day, and it really does grind you down. So taking those things away, and then there's a small opportunity. I don't want to stress this too much because the boss might start looking at me sideways, but it gives you the chance to multitask a little bit. You can take a phone call and focus on the phone call more than you might otherwise if you're steering the tractor without, driving into a hedgerow or something. You can send more coherent text messages. Got a couple slides here. I wasn't planning on using, this is just a picture I really like of some old machines that I bought last year. I think we already hit this. This is the ability to send a picture, even just have a reference in your mind. You got to go back to the shop, build a part. You kind of know what size it has to be. This is some of our components. So what needs to get changed is the steering wheel ring around there, and then the display, all the little components in the bottom. We don't have point row clutches. Our seating is pretty old school. We do have section control on our 30-foot drill. When we plant corn, we really try to avoid point rows as much as possible. I plant right into the headlands, and I try to keep the headlands to six rows if I can, just to displace that kind of unmanaged weed zone from 30 feet inside the field right to the hedgerow where it's going to be shaded. It's going to get, the trees are going to be sucking water out from underneath that corn. So I don't mind if the weeds are there. I'd rather have them there than on the inside edge of the field. And that's a spot where I don't care if I plant a few extra corn seeds. I kind of want whatever weed competition I can get. I think that'll do it for me, and we'll let Luke.
So my name's Luke Gianforti. We farm in central New York, just outside Syracuse. It's my father and I. We've been organic since '96, so it's the only way I've ever really known how to farm. I grew up on the farm, so we do a variety of crops: corn, soybeans, dry beans, oats, a couple different kinds of wheat, buckwheat, rye, triticale, sunflowers. We've tried everything about once and can go back if we need to. A lot of clay loam soils, a lot of side hills, rocks. We're about 1,200 feet elevation. So Dan already kind of covered some of the auto steer stuff. We've been using auto steer for 10 years now. Like Dan said, a lot of great reasons to use it, especially in the organic row crops. I find just cultivating, even if you don't have camera guidance, just having straight rows to work with makes a huge benefit. We also have a lot smaller fields and a lot smaller equipment, and I think the efficiency that we gain by using auto steer, especially in tillage equipment, and eliminating that overlap makes a huge difference, saves a lot of time. Seems to be our weather windows keep getting smaller and smaller every year, so just being able to get it done quickly helps. We use it to lay out strips, and we're using all deer system, and we've been using an SF3 correction signal This year we'll be going to SFRTK. So pretty high accuracy, able to go back and cultivate with it at the same time. And we're using one tractor as a planting tractor and cultivating tractor, so get a lot of use out of one piece of equipment. So we do have a camera guide hitch on our cultivator. It's a Schmatzer hitch, which uses the Kloss camera system. It's a first generation. We've had really good luck with that. Makes a big difference. Allows us to run finger weeders as well, so that helps. And have had real good luck with that. The auto steer, including added to the camera hitch, makes a big difference. You can turn around, see what you're doing, and helps eliminate a lot of stress, and you're able to cover some acres in a day. Historically, cultivating without auto steer or camera hitch, you just get burnt out, and you can only cover so much ground. That's kind of the inside, and we do run, I know on the first generation camera hitches, a lot of them didn't have the video screen on it. We do run the video screen, and I think that makes a big difference, being able to just see what the camera is seeing and gives you an idea what it's working with, and lets you adjust it a little better to get some better picture quality.
Is that like an add-on you can get with the iMovie or whoever uses the Kloss camera?
Yeah.
You can get that feed out?
Yeah, there's a plug for it in the harness. So, just some more pictures of the cultivator.
What brand of finger weeders are you?
Those are Tillmore finger weeders. So we ran a prototype for the first year, and then these are the production units now. Had pretty good luck with those. So we'll run finger weeders in corn, soybeans, and run them first and second pass a lot of times. So in a combine, we run auto steering combine, yield mapping, are collecting as much data as we can, trying to figure out what to do with the data with some of our limited input choices. Helps us do we do a lot on farm trials and do some seeding rate trials, and just kind of use that yield data for that when possible, kind of justify some tile in places. So we're not maximizing that data usage as much as I'd like to, but we got it all there. So we got years worth of data that we can do something with someday when someone finds some time to actually do it. So one of the other things that we recently upgraded that I think is pretty big on the organic side is our storage facility. We've added some new bins, and we've traditionally had top dry dryer, and we added some updated automated controls to it, and I think that's helped us a lot in terms of throughput and being able to get stuff done, especially we're pretty tight on labor during harvest, so having something that you can just walk away from and trust that the quality is going to be there, and we're going to have high quality grains, and able to unload trucks quick and load out trucks quick has made a lot of difference too. So yeah, just some pictures of the controls and dryer setup. So, and it wasn't cheap, but it was a relatively retrofit rather than building a greenfield storage facility. So that's all I got.
Another question.
Yep.
On your camera guidance.
Yep.
Are you coupling that with a base and rover RTK system, or are you just using standard?
No, we're using the SF3. So that's Deere system that gives you sub-inch accuracy in season. So it's not repeatable sub-inch year after year, but in season's all that really matters, especially doing full tillage. It's not. And year after year, we are doing some bio strip till planting strips of brassicas on 30-inch centers within our cover crop mix, and we are able to come back and plant over those strips the next year. You know, you may have to offset. Yeah, as long as you know where that first line was, because your guest rows are all right on. So if you get set in the right spot for the first pass, then you're good for the rest of the field. So we'll keep some points for where we think an AB line is for the whole year. So we can kind of come back to it. So the SFRTK, I think, will eliminate that, but we haven't. And we just run just SF1 for tillage and everything, and that's been more than sufficient. So Matt.
Okay, so I think the technological buzzword of 2023 was artificial intelligence, AI. So I thought I'd start my presentation by bringing AI into the conversation. I went on an AI image generator and I said, organic farmer fights weed with technology. And this was generated from a Renaissance painting era, which I think is what our neighbors think we do. And then this other image is in like a high-tech futuristic image generation, and that's what I like to think this conference is about. So it's a little bit of artificial intelligence to start off. So my name's Matthew Fitzgerald. I farm with my father, Joe Fitzgerald, in Hutchinson, Minnesota. We're 1 hour west of Minneapolis, St. Paul. A little bit about our farm climate, because I think context is important. We get about 28 inches of rainfall. We have flat, black, heavy soil. It's perfect for organic farming. We're a little bit further north than we are here today, and so kind of our sweet spot for corn maturity is like a 95-day. Soybeans is like a 1.5. We can grow wheat and some edible bean crops, so we do black beans, kidney beans, navy beans. There's a few canning crop markets in our area as well with field peas and sweet corn. So today I'm speaking kind of on behalf of our whole team. So on the left here is the team that I farm with day in and day out all summer. We use both local full-time help, and then we also use H-2A labor as part of our workforce. So I'm representing them, but they also contribute a lot of the ideas we're going to talk about. On our farm, I like to say we blend old and new, and so I'll point out a couple of things in this photo that demonstrate that. Our equipment is on 40-foot, 16-row, 30-inch spacing. We're using a lot of John Deere 856 cultivators, so circa maybe 1998, 96, a 2000 turn-of-the-century tractor. Right down here is what's called a Cultivision mirror, if anyone's cultivated. This is, I think, a more reliable tool than a camera on the back of your, because you're not having any wires breaking on you. You can see what's going on behind. And then we've got John Deere RTK. We also have integrated AutoPath. And so in the John Deere system, what that means is we're taking a record of when we're planting and then generating our future travel based on that planting record. So instead of using an AB line, I'm following exactly where the planter went. And so that's been something we've brought into the farm this last year. It helps for just quick ease of navigating fields, changing between headlands and in-row passes. And if there's ever any sort of error that maybe happens because of a planter drift, the tractor's going to follow the planter, not the GPS lines. So it's continuing to refine our in-field travel. The last thing I want to point out is the stand of corn. And I think there's 2 points about the stand of corn related to technology. The first is, I would say, genetics. On our own farm, we've seen the genetics and plant breeding really improve in the last 10 years. And so the capacity to raise good crops in adverse drought conditions has really improved. And the other thing I'll point out, too, is we've gone to a newer planter with hydraulic downforce, electric drives. And for us, that has been not so much about like the speed that we can do planting, but the emergence and stand that we're able to get because of a precise location of that seed. We're having a much higher stand count to start and finish the year, and I think a lot of that has to do with how that seed is placed in the ground. So I don't think it matters who's doing it. There's all kinds of different manufacturers, but planting technology and seed technology have been tremendous on our farm. So blending old and new. Any questions about what's in this photo? So we plant either side of 36,000 plants per acre. We do a little bit of variable rate, but there's already a variable rate with a cultivator. So, you know, we don't get too crazy about that. One of the conversations that comes up often around technology is like, how do you pay for it? How do I, question in the back.
Before we get to this slide.
Yep.
Can you speak in your experiences with, I know you've mentioned it a couple, I've done it for a while, but with AutoPath joining your farm here this year and the wiggle that is known with those
Yep.
back machines and going back and forth between full type versus mounted planter, and can you just spill more into that AutoPath business as far as pros and cons specific to types of tractors mounted?
Yep. Yeah, I think in any conversation around technology, it's always good to say like newer is not always better. The mechanics of a early series John Deere track machine, I think allows this machine to travel in a straighter path than a new R series. And the reason being that there's no cab suspension, there's no track suspension. We're talking about just direct motor, torque, straight line. And in kind of the mid 2000s, in our experience, you know, say 2010 to 2018 RT track machines, they were wiggling left and right when we purchased them. And it had to do with some of the steering components and then the way that this signal was being transmitted from the receiver into the steering components. And so hands down, I'd rather have this series tractor than a new series. So we brought in AutoPath as a way to kind of help adjust for inevitable wiggle that happened. And so it's an active debate on our farm, like what's the best way to plant straight? Because if you plant straight, then you can cultivate straight. Life gets easier. So I'd be interested to see what people, if you start talking planters and planting strategies, we'll be here all day. So let's talk. In the back. It was about I believe it was about $2,500 per like screen setup. It's a subscription, annual subscription, at least at our dealership. But yes, and so we were able to run AutoPath on an older series tractor, but you had to have the newer screen. So this is, well, I'll get this in a little bit, but I think there's a hamster wheel effect that's starting to occur within technology, and it's a conversation. Do we want to participate, or are there alternatives that we can start to look into? So evaluating investment. Often one of the questions is like, well, this stuff is expensive. How is it worth it? Should we do it? And in our farm, that question was around a weed zapper. So for us in soybeans, our weed control after we've gone through with tine weeders and rotary hoes and cultivators has been hand labor. So we do a lot of hand weeding, and we rely on a third-party crew. So folks that come up through an H-2A program. And in 2020, we weren't able to get access to that labor force because of border closures. And so we lost out on a really important piece of our weed control. And then in 21 and 22, the hourly rate to get hand weeding went up to about $45 per hour per person. And so pretty quickly, that gets expensive. And so we started to think more and more seriously about a weed zapper as sort of a 1-2 punch in combination with hand weeding. And so in order to get into it, we have neighbors that have weed zappers. And so we hired them to do some custom weed zapping, observe that for a year or two, talk to other guys who had used it, and then started to just do back and napkin penciling. Would the cost of this fully pay for itself in 2 or 3 years? And when we started to apply the cost savings on hand labor, looking at that versus the cost of custom and then cost of ownership, it made sense for us to make that leap. But the point I wanted to make is getting into any technology should be a slow approach, a metered approach, rather than going all in. And so any time that you can hire somebody else to do it, try it out with somebody else's equipment, I'd recommend that first before making investments. So yeah, bag, borrow, steal. If you've got a steal, I might even encourage that rather than spending a bunch of money right off the bat. In 2022, sprayer technologies seem to evolve into these autonomous drone units. This is a DJI drone sprayer. This is not something we own. We hired a neighbor to do this. And we were doing a trial of Pace Setter as a fungicide applied both to corn and soybeans. And so, again, I just want to underscore that just because it's new doesn't mean that you have to go out and buy it to get it. If you can have somebody else do it, start there. So we had a neighbor that wanted to start a custom spraying business using drones, and so we started out with 20 acres and applied 10 acres on corn and 10 acres on soybeans and wanted to evaluate if we saw any benefit. This is a really interesting technology, I think, for organic farmers. One, it's a lower cost per unit than going out and buying a whole self-propelled sprayer. There also is a couple of benefits mechanically. We will use occasionally aphid treatment, and so the benefit of a drone is that application can be timed out in a light sensitive setting. So if we're spraying an aphid treatment that's sensitive to light, it's hard to spray that or get a neighbor to spray that at dusk. You can do it with a drone. They also generate more of a kind of atmospheric disturbance from the turbines. So I think there's a better kind of placement of product into your canopy. And then these could be really interesting for like frost seeding clover into small grains. So this sort of smaller scale technology going forward is a trend that I'm very interested in. We have not purchased a drone. In this particular test, we didn't see a benefit from the Pace Setter, and so we're continuing to study it. How much do these cost?
How much did you benefit?
How much did?
The Pace Setter benefit, so you saw benefit, how much?
No, zero benefit.
Oh, no benefit.
So we're going to try another trial. It's hard to know year to year. I'm not a university extension person, so it was not a randomized replica. So I'm going to give you guys $1 million idea for $0 today. Here's my last piece of technology. In last winter, we sat down with a data scientist and said, what's the biggest impact on yield in our farm? We looked at every variable we could think of. Crop variety, crop rotation, soil productivity, annual rainfall, heat units, and we also included a couple of variables, the number of passes, so the frequency that we were in the fields, and then the length of time in between those passes. So were we in a field planting and then rotary hoeing in 5 days or in 3 days, and so on and so forth. And when we crunched all the numbers, the result came back that the number one indicator for yield was frequency of passes. Said differently, the more often that you're like weeding your garden, the better your tomatoes are going to be. So it's kind of an obvious conclusion, but we weren't doing a very good job of that. We found on our own farm that even though we aspired to be in a field kicking butt, beating up the weeds, we weren't always doing it everywhere. And maybe it was because it rained, we got kicked out of the fields for a couple days. We've got a farm with a really grumpy neighbor who doesn't like us, so nobody wants to go there. For whatever reason, there were places that we weren't achieving what we had planned to do. And so the really low-fi, low-cost solution was to create a whiteboard and make an indicator about when we were in a field. So top to bottom in this screen is our fields, and then left to right, each single square indicates 1 day in time, so moving across. Each color indicates a different pass, so a tillage pass, a planting pass, a tine weeding pass, rotary hoe, so on and so forth. This was transformational for our farm because it allowed us to very quickly understand what was happening everywhere on the farm, figure out what was the most important thing to be doing that day, and then have the team go after it and get it done. So I think it was $1 million idea for our farm. You guys can have it for free. We're working on trying to turn this into some kind of app or digital version that might also be able to produce certification documents, so the records of everything you've done, clean out logs, other stuff. We're looking for people to try it out for free this next year, so if you go to Try Farm Flow, we're looking for feedback on it. But this is the $1 million whiteboard that you can take home. So just a couple last comments before we go to our kind of panel. Again, I'm a big advocate of using things for free, so The online resources have been really helpful for us. YouTube is a great place to go watch other farmers do interesting things. I like to follow a couple of organic farmers on YouTube. Twitter is an interesting place. There's a couple of really active Facebook groups that are a great resource of peers in the organic world. And of course, O'Grain has the listserv too. So there's any number of resources to swap ideas that I would really encourage you to check out that don't cost anything. I'd also offer a word of caution about the hamster wheel of technology. It's really easy to chase the next greatest thing that's going to save you from weeds. And it could be a weed zapper. It could be the newest cultivator. It could be some kind of crazy drone thing. None of that matters if your fundamentals aren't mastered. So if your agronomics aren't there, if your fertility isn't there, if your timeliness, your plan for labor, crop rotation, kind of the 101 stuff is what makes it. And the technology is just the last 10% in my experience. So a word of caution about being too excited. So we'll just take questions.
Round of applause for just- Shifting, so this is a discussion time now, and I thought there was some talk about a question that each of you have for each other. Is that actually happening?
If the audience clams up, then that's all
Okay,
right.
okay, well, I didn't know where we're going with that, but yeah. So open discussion time now, and yeah, looking forward to hearing what you all have questions for the panelists here. No one's going to start.
I realized that I forgot to say absolutely anything about our operation too, if anyone's interested.
Yeah,
we farm about
go ahead.
1,000. We farm about 1,000 acres, mostly focused on small grains. We have a 7-year rotation with corn, wheat, rye, buckwheat, clover, two kinds of hard wheat, and we have a seed processing, cleaning facility, and a cooperatively owned flour mill. We bring in a lot of wheat and blend it for our flour mill, and we do have a camera guided cultivator that I didn't say anything about as well, because I wanted Luke to be able to talk about his because it's so much more fully integrated than ours. We're using vanilla WAS. We do plant with a GPS, and then our tractor is weaving about 3 or 4 inches from end to end on a pass, and the camera-guided cultivator does a fantastic job with that. And we can use WAS to get us down the row. I might have to nudge it once in a half mile or something, but for entry level, that's what we need, and it works for us. So.
Did a lot of you guys reconfigure your fields to be able to do straight AV lines for all your field operations? Or
Yeah, we've been doing, even before we had GPS, all of our contour lines were in straight lines. So even when we did it with flags and pacing from the corner of the field.
Yeah, I'll cut field edges if it's not a straight line along the edge, rather than try to follow the edge of the field for headlands. I'll just snap an AB line, and I'd rather have straight headlands than, and with a little strip along the woods or whatever with nothing, than a bunch of crooked rows that are tied into. So fields might shrink a little bit, but we go around and mow all the edges every year and kind of drive everything back, or better yet, take the woods down.
Matt, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about your experiments with drones. I heard you talk about using pace setter. Have you done anything else with it, like cover crop seeds or biologicals or micro?
Not to date, no. There's a few years ago, there's a company called Robot, R-O-W-B-O-T, that was based out of Minneapolis, and they came out with a kind of like looked like a 4-wheel drive Roomba that would travel down in between the rows, and it was basically using a reverse blower to push out cover crop seed, and we did have them seed. So a land-based drone that we tried for cover crops. Yeah.
Have either of you other guys done any work with aerial drones?
No, we did have a different researcher at Cornell approach us this spring, and there was a plan to get a drone on our farm for some interseeding in corn. Never materialized, but really have my fingers crossed that we can do that next year, because that's a great solution for us, because the reason we're not getting cover crops interseeded is because the field is too wet, and we don't want the compaction in the field. So that seems like amazing technology to me.
So I'm going to ask people to either come up to the microphone, or if you don't want to do that, we can have the panelists repeat the question. But it's being recorded, so we just want to make sure the questions are...
How does the cost compare to like aerial seeding compared to a pass with a drone?
I think we paid maybe $15 an acre, which is about the same. I think if you had the co-op come out and spray, it might be like $9 or $10 an acre. But one of the other challenges, at least in our area, is that there's not very many organic farmers. And so when I call my local co-op to say, hey, could you spray this organic product, and like I'll give your guys an extra $100 and a giant Snickers bar, and like they won't even give us a call back, you know. So I think that always is going to be the tension, at least for us, where there's not a network of organic farms. Is like, unfortunately, you're probably going to have to control that equipment eventually.
On the drone we do use, or I do use a little drone just for like imagery, just to scout fields and look at them from above. I think you can learn a lot by looking down at them from above, a lot more than you can see, you know, looking out across them. You can see different spots and, you know, wet spots, or just gives you more data, and you can just learn more from it. And so it's pretty cheap and easy to do.
We're going to have to resort to asking ourselves questions.
I guess I got 2 questions. So of all the technology you guys are using, what are maybe the top 1 or 2 items you would say? And then I guess my second question, as long as I'm up here, for those of you that are collecting yield data, are you using that data to make any management zones and using that for prescriptions or anything like that?
We're currently not. We're collecting some yield data. Our 2600 is pretty unreliable, so it seems to be getting a little bit fractured, and we don't have. We haven't taken the next step to getting the software to look at it yet. I think in another year or 2, we'd like to be where Luke is, where we have we're starting to collect it in a very systematic way. But I don't expect we'll be able to really delve into it for a few more years.
Question about top equipment?
Oh, sorry. For us, because we're very much still, on the entry level of the spectrum. I mean, the auto steer is like the one thing that we couldn't farm without at this point after having had it for 3 years.
Yeah, I would agree with the auto steer being kind of the low-hanging fruit, pretty easy, and you wouldn't want to go without it. I also think the camera guide hitch has made a big difference in just ease of getting across the ground and being able to get enough done in a day and getting better weed control. We are collecting a lot of data. We're not really to the point of making management zones per se, because we don't really have anything variable rate to put on. But we do track everything on like a per field basis. And if we're applying poultry litter or whatever it may be, we track that and put the rate in. So that gives us an idea, and we try to look back at that data, and we use it more for like in-field trials, is playing around with seeding rate or fertility rates in the field, and looking back at, but not true zone management.
Do you guys use any sort of app or program for crop reporting, inputting tillage events, inputting nutrient applications, seedings? Do you do that just with an Excel spreadsheet, paper, or like the John Deere My Farm app kind of thing, or what do you do there?
We've played around a little bit with like John Deere Operations Center. It's kind of it's one of those things where everyone has to be really invested, and you have to have everyone on board for it to work. For a farm where you have multiple people, and the management is a little bit, kind of all over the place. Also, Luke and I were talking about when we saw your website or your whiteboard. We're like, can you imagine having 19 fields? I think both of us, we're not farming big acres, but we both have over 100 fields, just because our fields are so tiny. So it just doesn't quite work for us yet. We use a calendar, and we write down when we do what. Yeah.
That's hopefully what our app will figure out. Dan's question earlier about like what technology you wouldn't go out without. I would say for us, the new planter technology probably has given us 15-20% yield bump. Like I think the ROI is there year one, 100%. That technology is available in all kinds of different manufacturers and retrofit kits. So I think there's ways to get into it more affordably. But kind of after the AutoPath, I would say the the planter technology has been huge.
What about the planter technology makes you say that big of a yield bump?
I would say, if you look at kind of agronomic 101, if you've got even emergence, you've got better yield results, and our emergence was way more consistent with that hydraulic downforce. It just placed the seed at the consistent depth, and especially like when we're trying to maybe blind tine-weed shortly after, if I know consistently where my seed is and I'm not concerned about it being at a different place, maybe because of the hills or a little roll or something, I'm able to be a little bit more aggressive with my tine weeding right after.
I wonder if that is one of those things that's like a little bit context important, because I don't feel like even emergence is necessarily one of our big challenges. We get about 35 inches of rain. This last year was the first year where we like really worried about emergence and the delay of emergence in fields. It was obviously a huge deal everywhere, but that doesn't feel like quite as much pressure to me. I don't know. What do you think, Lou? In terms of if you're going to invest in, downforce, fancy things for.
Yeah, I think early emergence is important to us, but I don't know that we see that big of a fluctuation in it. But that is one piece of technology I forgot to mention that just thought of. I used for blind cultivation, I track everything in terms of growing degree days. I don't know if the Cornell has a Climate Smart farming website that tracks growing degree days by location, and you can put it, and I don't know if that does that go outside New York?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if it goes all the way to Wisconsin, but yeah, it goes outside of New York. Yeah, there's a gray area there. So, yeah.
But that you can punch in exactly the date you planted it, and it tracks growing degree days and gives you a 5-day projection of where your growing degree days are. And I found that really beneficial for blind cultivation. Usually about 90 units after planting is about the sweet spot to hit it. It's started to germinate, but not too far. And with that 5-day prediction, you can see what day and look at the forecast and try to figure out what day you should go in there. If you should go earlier, you can wait. And I found that very beneficial.
Microphone. Go ahead.
I'll give you a background to my question first. Last spring, I do both organic and conventional farming. And so I have a 4930 sprayer that we use on the conventional farm, and we have done some fungicide tests with on the organic side too. But I was reached out by an organic operation to the west of me, east of me in another county, and they wanted me to come in and spray, I believe it was home plate or whatever they call that stuff now, the organic chemicals. Yep. And for personal reasons and my feelings on that product in general and what the integrity of producers, I told them no, I would not spray it. And I don't know if they ever got it sprayed or not, but I'm just curious if you guys have, what your thoughts are on that, and if you experimented at all with it, if you see any results, I guess. So, but what's that? I don't think it is. Yeah. But supposedly he said they claim that the organic certifier approved it for the entire field, which I couldn't hardly believe that. And I said if I did spray it, I'd have to see proof of that, but I didn't ever hear any more.
I'm fairly sure it's approved for field-wide desiccation or not in crop.
Well, he was claiming he could go into the plant, so I could spray it post-plant rework, burn it out. So, but I just don't know that. Wasn't part of it, so.
I don't have any experience with that product, but we use well, like I said, we tried Pace Setter, and then it's escaping me, but it's a chrysanthemum-based product for the aphids, Pyganic. We've used that. They're the two products that we've used on our farm. Pretty good luck with Pyganic. The problem is it's like 20 gallons of water per acre, and you got to spray it at dark, and you look suspicious if you're an organic guy out there at dark spraying something.
Yeah, we don't have the only sprayer we own is the one we use for Pyganic in the grain storage facility. Even the conventional guys where we are, this was the odd year that they did, a lot of them did apply foliar fungicides late in the season, it's not, I guess, as much part of the picture because I feel like our upper limit for yields is so much lower than you guys. I feel like we don't have like that. We're not going to get as much extension out of our yields putting those foliar fungicides on. Like I said, even the conventional guys aren't quite as into it as it seems like it is out here because you guys are doing such a much better job than us. Yeah.
I don't have any experience with it.
I gather that you guys are all farming with older generation. I guess I'm kind of curious if you could talk about, without being too ageist, like the part of the decision-making process in terms of making those equipment decisions, technology decisions, and that adoption with, farming with people that are older than you.
I think that was basically you.
Yeah, that was my question to everyone, so good. In our operation, my father was apprehensive about, some technology, but I was pretty fortunate he gave me the reins to try it, and now he would be, auto steer, for instance. He doesn't know how he ever did it without it. A couple hours in a tractor and able to actually turn around and see what's going on behind you and not worry about hitting anything, even though he's hit the same culvert twice. But so been pretty fortunate. But it is a conversation to have, and trying new things, and you gotta figure out how to be able to talk someone through. No, hit that button. No, back that button. And so some of the remote display access and everything, I think, helps a lot on that. So you can kind of pull it up and look at it. So it's not easy, but I think if it's a good product, they can be convinced.
Yeah, not having any ownership role at the farm, I've definitely had to do the legwork to get this into some of our machines. My boss has had some health issues, so he actually doesn't do very much field work at all. The big thing was just being incremental about it. We start with a $200 T-Jet light bar. Oh, we can spread clover at night now. We're not hunting for the frost seeding days. And then, just the slow pitch, we had a good year. Can we spend $2,500 and make a big difference? That kind of thing. And then, even to the point of, this is a lesson for all you guys, if you pay your employees really well, they'll start buying stuff for your farm. So I actually own one of the on-track steering systems that we have just because I wanted another one, and you can sell them. So yeah, but and then the other thing is just finding the time to get them. Like I said, Tor doesn't do a lot of field work, but when you do have the chance to get them into it, set it up for them, turn them loose with it, and then just let them see what it's doing. That's you have to be a salesman if you're not the one making the decision necessarily. But thankfully, Tor does let me make a lot of the decisions at this point. So
I'd say the last thing is just kind of, and this is important kind of for all decision making, is just being clear about what your mission is and kind of what the DNA of your farm is. So we often talk about being early adopters. We went organic in 2000, and so that's something that we really believe in. And so that's going to be an approach that we take to like a crop rotation or conversations about regenerative or technology. But I think that's also important, like if you're working with a team, that you're really clear about like who we are and why we're doing things. And that shows up in decisions about technology, but maybe also like the approach to how we work with neighbors or beginning farmers or whatever else. So if you can be kind of consistent about who you are and why you're doing things, that helps.
And then just a related question. Obviously, there's a learning curve to these technologies for yourselves or for people you're working with. How does the technology piece play into that decision? Like, are you seeing technology helping in terms of maybe some gaps with skilled labor, or is it like, learning this technology is a bigger hurdle to overcome compared to, let's say, some older, maybe less complicated technologies?
I would say on our farm, we don't have a camera hitch, but that's something we're thinking about pretty seriously because of that question of, I think you can get somebody who's a less experienced cultivator operator in a cultivator with a higher level of confidence. And I'd also say like a practice that we've seen others do is run tine weeders with the tine removed right next to corn. And that seems to be sort of an emerging technique for like a pre-cultivation kind of sweet spot, and that requires really, really close tolerances. And so that's something that's kind of pushing us to think about adding different technology.
Yeah, I would say it's absolutely only a benefit. Just take anything off their plate. I mean, especially because we're not at the level of integration where, you know, they have to pull into the field and like set up the equipment, set up the implement, and like do all that. Like, but just putting them into the field, I think it allows you to bring them up to speed a lot quicker because you've taken a little bit off their plate, and that's the part that's kind of the most teachable. Like in the future, if you don't have GPS in the tractor for a day, like steering is easier to learn than running some of the equipment. So.
I operate most of the equipment myself. It's kind of my father's 75 years old, so it's kind of a one-man show and headed that way more. And so I've invested pretty heavily in technology, trying to avoid having anyone else to do it, which some days is good, some days not so good.
So I'm curious to hear a little more about how you're using the camera hitches. So it's kind of like, yeah, in execution, right? So are you using it, you know, because you can get at real small crop, right? Are you using it when it's starting to get taller, or now do you have to go to a wand? What challenges are you experiencing? Is too much dust a problem? Is when you get into weedy sections, does it have trouble finding the row? And then what was the last thing? Oh, what kind of, obviously using it on a cultivator, but I was curious if anyone had tried it with like a tine weeder with the tines pulled up for that precision tining. So just some of those camera hitch questions.
So we're using it, the camera, I'll use it on essentially every cultivation pass. We have one cultivator we'll run, and it's on it, so we'll run it right through. Mostly running it with our side hills. The GPS can get you tractor between the rows, but the cultivator, we got a lot of side hills, you know, drift. We run a mounted planter, so everything's mounted, so we try to keep it everything as tight as possible, but we still end up with that drift on these side hills. So the hitch helps with that. I don't know that it necessarily gets us in there any earlier than when you could see it, you know, with your eyes. Sometimes if you do get some weedy spots, it has some trouble. We have some trouble if the sun's just right, more so early morning. When it's low, when the sun's low in the horizon, we'll have more issues. And we don't have, I've tried to kind of get lights on it, but never have been that successful with the lights, so aren't able to run at night. With the hitch we have, it rather than the more common slide hitch that's up tighter to the tractor, the Schmatzer's kind of a parallelogram, so it pushes the cultivator back probably 2.5, 3 feet. And so I know some people have had issues with the camera, especially on narrower implements, having interference with the tires, especially on like a 6-row. You couldn't run duals because your camera's looking at the tire. We've been pushed back, so we're fortunate not to have to deal with that. We did go from a 6-row to an 8-row machine, and one of the reasons for doing that was so that we could move the camera out and be seeing 3 rows instead of 2 rows. So just kind of gathering more data with the camera and getting a higher quality picture. Being able to see what the camera sees with the screen, I think is huge and worth, you know, it's a $1,000 screen, which seems a little excessive, but you can actually see what the camera's seeing. Otherwise, you're just guessing and looking at it, and the AI think it's looking at that row, or I guess it, I don't know what it's seeing, but we'll try this setting. And so you don't really know if you're getting a better image or a worse image or what it's seeing. So that's helpful too, I found. So.
Yeah, we only grow about 100 acres of corn. I would say that I think it does get us into the field a day or two earlier, but you're going to be going slow enough that advantage is going to be kind of worn out in a couple of days. We usually delay our planting enough that the soil's pretty warm. I feel like our corn is, out of the ground in 4 or 5 days, and likely through that stage where it's too big, you can't tine weed it, but it's still too small to cultivate. I feel like it gets through that stage in a quick enough period that we personally don't have any interest in tine weeding without tine weeding in the row. We stale seed beds, so we try to run a tine weeder over the fitted ground about, if we have the weather based on the forecast and if we're confident in the forecast, we tine weed the field before we plant it, 24 to 36 hours. Plant the field, tine weed it that day, and try to stimulate that. You want that first weed flush to be where you can kill it with the tine weeder the day that you plant it, and then try to get one more blind cultivation in. But we've never really felt like picking up a tine over the row was going to work for us. But we also don't have RTK, so it's not something we could do anyway without doing it like as if we were cultivating. We never second pass. It's very rare that I leave the camera set up on the tractor for the second pass. Usually the first pass, we're going 2.5, 3.5, maybe 3.7 miles an hour. Second pass, I put a 3-shank. Well, this year is what I did. It's happened a few different ways in the past, but 3-shank international cultivator, and we're going 4.5 to 6.5 miles an hour, and the camera, once the corn's this big, I feel like the camera is just, I can do a better job just freehanding it. So, and thankfully, you got to keep those skills alive because you never know when the camera's going to break down. So.